Confronted my anorexic wife about her dangerous habits and feared leaving the baby alone with her. Now she's shutting me out. I know it sounds bad, but please let me explain everything before judging me. I'm a 34-year-old man, and I'm deeply worried about my wife, who's 33, and our newborn baby girl. My wife has struggled for years with anorexia. She was first hospitalized in high school, and again in law school. I actually met her in college and witnessed her hit rock bottom during her second battle with the disorder. It was absolutely terrifying for both of us. What's so difficult about her illness is that, as she's always told me, it's not really about wanting to be thin or look a certain way. The first time she got sick, after the sudden death of her mother, she started obsessing over controlling her weight simply because it was something to fixate on, instead of all the pain she was really feeling. For years before our daughter was born, she was finally doing better. She ate normal meals, exercised a few times a week, avoided weighing herself obsessively, and no longer made conscious efforts to lose weight. But everything took a turn after our baby. My wife decided to take a year off work to stay home with the baby. I originally supported this decision, but now I can't help but feel like it was the worst thing we could have done. She's all alone all day, with nothing to occupy her thoughts except losing the baby weight. At first, when she told me she wanted to lose the baby weight, I thought it was a pretty normal sentiment for women who just gave birth. Your body changes a lot after all. I didn't think much of it until the weight began falling off her rapidly, far beyond what you'd expect just from new motherhood. She's now probably at least 20 pounds lighter than before she even got pregnant. Her habits started to change in ways that began to alarm me. She suddenly cooked elaborate meals and baked all sorts of things, but refused to eat carbs during the week, always preparing a separate, sparse meal for herself. She became obsessed with fitness influencers and started binge-watching The Biggest Loser, a show she hadn't revisited in years. One day, out of concern, I checked her Fitbit, and discovered she was logging at least 10 miles of steps every day. When I confronted her about it, she told me she just loved the long walks with our baby or running on the treadmill to relieve the stress from being home with the baby day after day. But then she fractured her ankle from all the running, and when she found out she wouldn't be able to run for months, she completely broke down in hysterics, sobbing for hours. All she did next was eat even less, as if to compensate for not being able to exercise. I've tried talking to her, many times, telling her how much I'm worried about her health. Every single time, she shuts me down and insists she's just being healthy and finally has a chance to focus on herself. The worst part is how defensive she gets, accusing me of being overprotective whenever I suggest therapy or talking to someone about what's going on. Things reached a breaking point recently when we went to my parents' house for dinner. My mother's face fell the second she saw my wife. She looked truly shocked by her appearance. She pulled me aside privately to tell me that my wife looked outright sick, skeletal, shivering constantly, her fingers tinged blue, patches of her hair falling out. It's painfully clear to me she's not okay, but she absolutely refuses to see it, or admit any of her habits are unhealthy. Then, last weekend, we got a rare moment alone, our anniversary. My parents watched our baby so we could spend a couple nights downtown. It was meant to be special, our first time getting away together since the birth, a chance to reconnect physically after such a long stretch without intimacy. My wife tried to initiate intimacy, but as she approached me all I could notice was her frailty, the gaunt outline of her bones, and the overwhelming evidence of her illness. I felt tears sting my eyes, and I just couldn't do it. I told her bluntly that she was far too skinny, that she desperately needed therapy, and that I was sick with worry for her. She got upset again, accused me of trying to control her, insisting she was just devoted to taking care of herself and looking her best after pregnancy. I tried to clarify. When I said you don't look good, I meant that her ill health was obvious, that it frightened me to see her like that, and that everyone was concerned about her. That comment shattered her. She started to cry, asking me if I wasn't attracted to her anymore. I begged her to let me in, to tell me what pain or fear had her turning to starvation again, but her only answer was to shut down further. She told me she wouldn't share anything after hearing me say those words. Now, she barely talks to me. She won't have a real conversation, and I'm terrified that I made things even worse with my desperate honesty. I don't know what else to do, but I feel like the person I love is slipping away, and I can't stop it. Am I really such an asshole for telling her what everyone else is already thinking, and for being so desperate to get her the help she clearly needs before it's too late? Whenever I think about leaving my wife alone with our baby, alarm bells start going off in my mind. The truth is, she simply shouldn't be alone with the baby at all. I know this deep in my bones. It's not because she's a bad parent, but because her medical condition makes it dangerous for both her and our child. Sometimes she'll want to get out of the house, take the baby for a walk around the neighborhood or the mall, maybe just to stretch her legs and get some exercise. I worry constantly. What if she has one of her medical episodes while they're out and about? Sometimes it makes me wonder which is riskier, staying at home or being outside. If she's at home and something happens, at least there's a chance someone might check in, or maybe a neighbor would hear. But out in public, it could be better if help is close, or it could be much worse. I can't control who ends up next to her when she loses consciousness, or whether that stranger can be trusted with my child. The stark reality is this world isn't honest and safe. If she collapses on the sidewalk or in a parking lot, my baby could end up in the arms of whoever just happens to be walking by. The thought of that risk, of something happening that I could have prevented, haunts me. It's more than just fear, it's the kind of worry that claws at your conscience. The scenario plays in my head again and again. What if my wife faints, falls, and our baby is hurt, or something even worse happens while she's unconscious on the ground or floor? I know, without a doubt, that I'd never forgive myself for allowing her to be alone with our child when I knew the risks all along. As much as my wife insists she's fine, I'm also certain that, deep down, even if she won't admit it now, she'd never forgive herself either. Update 1. After realizing I scared a lot of people, I felt I owed an update, especially now that my wife and I have finally come to some kind of resolution. I was at a total loss for how to handle what was happening, and every instinct in me said, get her to a hospital now. When I started reading more, and after hearing the frightening truths about how dangerous my wife's illness truly is, the denial I'd been living in started to crumble. For a while, I tried to convince myself she was okay, maybe because I so desperately wanted that to be true, but it's unavoidable now. My wife has relapsed, and it's painfully obvious to everyone. Late Friday, feeling a rising panic, I called my father-in-law. I told him directly how deeply concerned I was for my wife's safety, and that I needed his help to make her see the gravity of the situation. He's an incredible dad, didn't even hesitate. He was on a plane that very night, flying here in just under an hour. When he arrived, the two of us sat down with my wife, heart pounding, and tried to make her understand how worried we are. She got defensive, angry, didn't want to listen at first. Her father brought up how hard it had been for her to grow up without her mom, reminding her that none of us would ever want our daughter to go through the same thing. Hearing those words, I could see it shook her, even if she kept insisting she was fine. But that intervention was what nudged her to at least agree to a checkup. For the first time, she finally admitted she'd been feeling dizzy and that her heart felt fluttery. Those words terrified me. I pushed even harder, and thankfully, given her medical history and the seriousness of her symptoms, we were able to get her an immediate appointment. To spare her privacy, I won't get into all the details, but soon after, she was checked into an inpatient program pretty close to home. I have so many conflicting emotions swirling inside of me right now. I'm relieved she's finally getting help, and I feel reassured knowing she's beaten this before, not just once, but twice. Now, with our daughter, I know my wife has more motivation than ever to fight her way through recovery. But at the same time, it devastates me to see her in so much pain, and honestly, I feel like I failed for not stepping in sooner. I can't stop worrying about her. I never want her to suffer, never want to be apart from her like this. When I left her at the program last night, she was sobbing. She didn't want to be away from me or our little girl. Driving away without her felt gut-wrenching, but deep down, I know this is what she needs. My mom has offered to help with our baby while I'm working, so thank God for that. Still, the house feels so empty. I miss my wife. I wish she was home. But I keep reminding myself that the most important thing she can do is focus on getting better, so she can enjoy a long and, hopefully, very happy life. I'm clinging to hope, bolstered by stories of others who've made it through something similar and are now okay. I keep telling myself my wife can do the same. She will come through this, again. Update 2. I thought the hardest part would be dropping her off. It wasn't. The hardest part was the call the next morning from a number I didn't recognize, a calm voice telling me they were transferring my wife to the medical hospital for monitoring. Her labs are unstable, the woman said, and then she said refeeding risk and telemetry, and I was already shoving the stroller into the trunk with one hand and calling my father-in-law with the other. Seeing her on a pale blue floor, a heart monitor tracing out her pulse like the outline of a mountain range, and 4 humming and that little clip on her finger pulsing red, broke something in me I didn't know could still break. She saw me, and her face went red splotched and wet in 2 seconds, and she grabbed my wrist with this desperate strength that didn't match what the rest of her looked like and said, I don't want to die. I don't want to miss her. I put my forehead to hers, and for the first time since all of this began she let herself say it without trying to dress it up as self-care or goals. It was terror, plain and human, and it cracked the shell she's been living inside. They stabilized her and sent her back to the program after 2 days, and I thought we might settle into some kind of rhythm with visiting hours and family calls. Instead, life decided to throw in something I wasn't prepared for. 2 afternoons later there was a knock on my door during nap time. I opened it to a woman with a canvas tote and a badge clipped to her sweater. She introduced herself, said she was a social worker, that the hospital had made a mandated report because of concerns about caregiver capacity during a medical crisis. I swear my vision tunneled. I didn't even know where to put my hands. She was kind, calm, observant in a way that made me feel both seen and exposed. She asked to see where the baby sleeps, who watches her while I'm at work, what our plan is when my wife comes home. I found myself narrating our life, the bottle drying rack, the freezer full of milk my mom helped me bag, the baby monitor crackling the soft ocean noise, like I was giving a tour of a museum exhibit called We Are Not Falling Apart. She nodded, wrote, asked if there were firearms in the home, no, medications within reach, no, whether we had family support, yes, and he will sign whatever you want. She explained what a safety plan is and slid a paper across our kitchen island that said, in shockingly plain language, that my wife is not to be the sole caregiver for our daughter until cleared by her treatment team. Reading it was like swallowing a handful of stones. I signed. My father-in-law signed. She watched my baby yawn and said, "She looks well loved," and left me standing in the quiet with a copy of the plan and a coffee ring on it where her mug had been. I told my wife about CPS on our next family call, because not telling her felt like building a future on a lie. I expected fury. I got silence that stretched long enough I thought the screen had frozen. Then she whispered, "They think I'm dangerous," and I could see the words hit her like a physical thing. Her therapist on the call didn't flinch. She talked about systems built to protect kids and families, about how this plan doesn't mean my wife is a bad mother but that she is a mother in treatment. My wife wiped her face with the heel of her hand and said, "Very small, I want to be cleared. Tell me what to do." It was the first time we talked about recovery like a set of choices we could make today, not a hope we might get to eventually. The program allowed a supervised, short visit outside at a little fenced courtyard if we brought the baby during a time when their nurse could be there. I was scared it would backfire, that it would send her spiraling or make her beg to leave early. But the second our daughter saw her, she did that wild baby kick that shakes her whole body and made this noise she makes only when she's really happy, a squeal from somewhere deep that sounds like a rusty gate repairing itself. My wife held out her arms and then froze, a weird, primal caution flickering across her face like she didn't trust herself to be strong enough to lift her own child. The nurse said, gently, "Sit. We'll hand her to you." They did. Our daughter grabbed my wife's necklace like she always does and immediately drooled on her shirt, and my wife laughed and cried at the same time. She kept saying, "Hi. Hi. Hi," like she'd forgotten every other word, and then she said, "I'm going to stay. I'm going to do the whole program," and looked up at the nurse like she needed someone official to witness it. In between all that, our house has been revealing its hiding places to me. I was looking for a spare swaddle in the back of our hall closet and found a shoebox tucked behind a stack of old textbooks. Inside were letters in her meticulous neat handwriting, dated and sealed, some to me, some to our daughter. One said for her first day of kindergarten. Another said for when she asks about grandma. I only opened one. If I don't get to say this in person, I don't even know how to describe what it's like to read your wife tell your child that she is sorry, that she tried, that she hopes she inherited your laugh and her mother's stubbornness, that she should never look for her mother in mirrors. I sat on the floor and read it twice and then held it like it might burn through my skin. I brought the box with me to our next session and told her I found it. She looked mortified for a second, and then she exhaled and said, "I wrote those when she was 6 weeks old and I couldn't sleep because I was sure the night would swallow me up." She said the words postpartum depression out loud, then postpartum anxiety, and then said she had been having awful thoughts she didn't understand, shadows moving in the corners of the nursery that were just piles of laundry, counting the number of steps to the stair gate every time she walked past it. Starving herself had drowned those thoughts in a different kind of noise. Hearing her say it made so much click into place I felt dizzy. The treatment team has started including me in meal support training. It's humbling to sit in a fluorescent lit room with paper plates of plastic food and practice saying, "You don't have to like it, you just have to eat it," without letting my voice shake. They're teaching me how to talk to the part of her that is sick without talking to her like she's a stranger. They tell me I can't save her with the right sandwich, but I can make home a place where the eating disorder's voice doesn't get to be the loudest. I go home and plate my own dinners the way they show me so it won't be foreign when she's back. I text pictures to her dad of the baby wearing pajamas with lemons on them, and he starts keeping a little notebook of her nap lengths and bottle ounces because it helps him feel like he's holding on to something measurable. Not everything is hopeful. There was a day last week where she called me from a hallway phone, hiccup crying, saying she couldn't do it, that she was going to sign herself out, that she had Googled her BMI and it was fine. I went cold all over and then made my voice very boring, very sturdy, like the voice you use to tell a scared dog to come inside. I read her the sentence from the safety plan. I told her I wouldn't break it, and neither would her dad, and neither would my mother, that if she came home today without clearance she would not be left alone with our baby for even 5 minutes, and that the only way to change that was through the path right in front of her. She went silent, and then said, almost angrily, "You're not going to rescue me," and I said, "No. I am going to stand here until you walk out the door you're supposed to walk out of." She hung up. I sat on the kitchen floor and shook until my teeth hurt. 20 minutes later her therapist called me and said, "She's in group." There are tiny weird victories that feel like confetti someone keeps sprinkling in our hair when we forget to look up. She called me after a snack and said, "I ate the thing I hate the most," and then, before I could praise her, added, "Don't make it a big deal." We both laughed, which felt like remembering how to drive a car after you've been walking for months. My mom taught me how to make my wife's grandmother's soup over FaceTime so I can freeze containers for when she comes home. The baby said "ba" for everything yesterday: bottle, bath, banana, and it sounded stupidly like back, and I can't help but hear it as a promise I'm not allowed to rely on but will anyway. The last time I saw my wife, she had a new soft fuzz of hair along her hairline you don't notice unless the sun hits it just right. Her fingers weren't blue. She was wearing the sweatshirt I brought her, the one with our city skyline on it, and she kept rubbing her thumb along the stitched outline of the tallest building like it was a worry stone. "I made an appointment with my OB to talk about medication," she said, almost like she was confessing to something. I told them about the thoughts. She looked at me like I might revoke my love, and when I didn't move she let herself breathe. She asked me to bring the baby again soon, and the nurse said we could as long as our daughter was bundled up, and we kept it short. As we were saying goodbye, she said, "Will you bring the letters next time? I want to open them with you. I don't want her to ever need them, but I don't want them to be a secret in our house anymore." I promised I would. Then she reached for my hand, squeezed until my knuckles popped, and said, "Tell her I'm working on being here." I kissed her and told her I would. I will. Update 3. They called it a therapeutic pass, which makes it sound gentle, like a no to teacher sign so you can go to the library. The rules weren't gentle. Eat the snack in the brown bag before you reach the freeway. No step counting. No detours. Back by 5. I said yes to all of it like a man signing a mortgage. She walked out to the curb with a nurse shadowing her and a paper cup of water in her hand. The fuzz at her hairline has gone from maybe to definitely. She had on the sweatshirt with the skyline and joggers with the cuffs rolled because her ankles are puffy in a way that is new for us, and when she saw me clock it, her chin got that tight brace to it. "It's water," she said before I could even open my mouth, and the nurse just nodded and said, "Bodies heal loudly sometimes." They handed me the brown bag like I might try to negotiate with it. She climbed in the passenger seat and held the bag in her lap for 2 lights and then, like she was jumping off a diving board, ripped it open and ate the stupid granola bar without looking at it. At the 3rd light she handed me her Fitbit. No speech. Just took it off, put it in my palm, closed my fingers around it, and went back to staring out the window. The imprint of it felt like teeth. Home didn't know what to do with itself when we walked in. The house did that thing houses do where it exhales and creaks. My father-in-law had scrubbed things I forgot had surfaces. The stroller was lined up like a good soldier. The baby was in her bouncer in a lemon yellow onesie, and when she saw her mother she made a sound I haven't heard since the courtyard, high and broken with joy, like she was trying to laugh and sneeze at the same time. My wife froze for half a heartbeat and then sat, and we handed her our girl the way you hand someone a priceless vase, even though babies are more durable than that. Our daughter's fist went straight for the skyline stitching and then for my wife's face, patting, mapping, welcome welcome welcome. There was a bulleted plan in my head I tried to pretend wasn't there. The soup my mother taught me simmered on the stove. There was bread I had the gall to slice thick on purpose, the exact audacity her eating disorder hates. Instead of hovering I plated like the training room taught me, put a normal amount of soup in a normal bowl and cut the bread and put butter on the table without an essay attached. She looked at the plate the way people look at snakes. Her knee jittered underneath the table like an old refrigerator. I heard my own voice come out smooth and almost bored, the way we practiced. "You don't have to like it. You just have to eat it." She closed her eyes like she was letting an elevator drop and took a bite. The baby made this outraged "Why is no one feeding me something delicious right this second?" squawk at the same time, and all 3 of us laughed because some cosmic stage manager has timing. We FaceTimed her therapist from our kitchen after, because part of the pass was exposure work for the thoughts she finally named. The therapist had to set the phone on the counter and put the baby on the rug in front of the gate, and just be. No checking the lock. No counting the balusters. Name the thought out loud when it walked through. My wife's voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a pool when she said, "My brain is saying you'll drop her, my brain is a liar, I'm sitting here." 30 seconds was forever. At 60 my father-in-law coughed at the sink and then apologized to the room like it was a chapel. At 90 my wife snorted, not a laugh, exactly, more a derisive exhale, and said, "I'm here," like it was a spell. We sat for 2 minutes before the timer went off. It felt like deadlifting air. There are always landmines you can't plan for. The neighbor popped his head over the hedge while we were carrying a bag of clothes to the trunk after the pass and said, "You look amazing, Mom. What's your secret?" In that bouncy, clueless way people have when they think they're giving a gift. I felt the entire world contract to the space between her eyelids. She swallowed, nodded, smiled with exactly 0 teeth, and said, "My secret is that I have help." Then she walked inside and shut the door, and when I followed 5 seconds later she had her hands on the island, knuckles white, and said, "Every cell in my body lit up when he said that," and then, clear and careful, "And I am not going to chase that light." We stood there with the hum of the fridge being the only sound and let the sentence settle inside the house. We opened the box of letters, not all of them. We took "If I don't get to say this in person," and her throat did that clicking thing it does when she's trying to keep tears from becoming sobs, and she said, "I don't ever want her to have this version of me." She didn't want to throw it away like it was trash. It wasn't. So we did something that felt halfway between funeral and baptism. We tore it into strips and mixed the paper with potting soil and planted a tiny Meyer lemon tree in a blue pot on our stoop, because our daughter's pajamas made us think maybe we could have a future that's corny and domestic on purpose. My wife pressed the soil down with the flat of her hand and said, "Grow into something she can hold," and I realized I had been holding my breath for days and finally let it go. The social worker called in the middle of nap time check to say she'd need to stop by for a quick home visit while my wife was on pass, to talk about what a step down would look like. I stood there suddenly sure I was going to fail a test I didn't study for. She came with the toad and the sensible shoes and sat at our table and asked my wife if she understood the safety plan. My wife said, "I hate it," without flinching, and I agree to it. The woman looked at the lemon tree through the glass and then back at the line where our names were scrawled under the words protective factors and said, "Then we're in good shape." It was the first time any official person had used a phrase that sounded like land we could stand on. Not everything was a movie moment. The refeeding water, which we were prepared to joke about and call her bread ankles and make levity out of, hurt when she put shoes on. It itched. She wanted to crawl out of her own skin. She kept rubbing at her wrists like there was a secret zipper there. She asked me 3 different times if her face looked puffy or just enough to look alive, and I learned how to answer the question without laying a landmine, by looking at her eyes and not her cheekbones and saying, "You look like you're here." The meds her OB started had a side effect that made her stomach flip for 3 mornings in a row, and on the second morning she said she couldn't tell the difference between nausea from the pill and nausea from nerves and whether that meant the pill wasn't doing anything. And I said, "It might be both, and also you're still doing it," and she said, "I hate that you're good at this," which, translated, meant, "Thank you." We adjusted. She took the pill anyway. She slept 1 hour more the third night. I don't know if it was the medicine or exhaustion, I don't care. There was this 1 minute that is going to live in my head rent-free until I'm 90. The baby, who has been doing consonant nonsense for weeks, ba, duh, ba, was chewing savagely on a chilled silicone thing because whatever tooth factory is inside her skull has been on night shift, and in the middle of it she let out and then ma with the exaggerated mouth shape she uses when she's making fun of us without knowing she's doing it. My wife went completely still. She didn't claim it. She didn't say, "That counts," like parents do when they're keeping score. She just put her hand over her own mouth like the word might escape if she didn't hold it there, and then she said, like a vow, "I'm not missing the rest." On the way back to the program we swung by the e-waste drop-off behind the hardware store and I slid the bathroom scale into the bin. It made a satisfying, terrible sound, like brittle promises breaking. She watched it drop and grabbed the sleeve of my sweatshirt with 2 fingers, the way you do when a subway jerks. "We can buy another one if we need it for the baby in a year," she said like she needed to build an exit ramp before her brain spun out. "We will borrow one from the pediatrician the one time we need it," I said, and she nodded, a little helpless, and said, "Okay. Okay." I put the receipt the teenager handed me, a slip of thin paper that just says scale in tiny letters, on the fridge next to the safety plan, under a magnet shaped like a lemon my mother swears she didn't buy on purpose but definitely did. The program is talking in weeks now, not in maybe. There is a date circled in highlighter for a step down to partial days. It's written in her messy left-handed scrawl on our calendar like a dare. The conditions are not forgiving. Labs in range, weight trend patient not ed, meds in her system for long enough that we're not just guessing, a family meal completed at home with a coach on speaker, but they are doable. Yesterday she sent me a picture I will probably set as my lock screen even though it's not flattering in any conventional way, her tray after snack, nothing rearranged to look better, crumpled napkin, smear of yogurt like a white brush stroke, and her hand making a peace sign upside down because she doesn't know how to take selfies and is learning everything again. Before she signed back in after her pass, we sat in the car and she wrote a new letter on the back of an old electric bill because it was the only paper in the glove compartment. She dated it. "For when you roll your eyes at me in 7th grade, she wrote, grinning without looking up, because I plan on earning it." Then she put it in the visor like something we might need for a toll. She kissed the baby's forehead and told her, "I'm working on being at the boring Tuesday stuff," and when the nurse came to get her she waved and then, "This is how I know something seismic has shifted," she said, "Will you bring a bag with the ugliest, softest sweatpants next time? I'm cold now that I'm not running all the time." I said yes. I would bring her the moon in drawstring if she asked. And then she went back inside to do this possible thing, and I drove home with the baby in the backseat saying ba ma ba like she was practicing writing our lives in a new alphabet. Update 4. The date we circled in highlighter stopped being theoretical and turned into a Tuesday that showed up on our doorstep wearing sneakers. Step down. Partial days. Mornings at home, afternoons back at the program, nights with me. The discharge papers were crisp in a folder with a tab that said her name like it was a file someone had to keep track of, and then there was her hand in my hand, warm and damp and very alive, tugging me down the hallway that still smells faintly like baby soap and coffee. Home looked at her the way dogs do when their person has been gone too long, first a head tilt, then a full body wag. The lemon tree is already pretending it has opinions, 2 shiny leaves angled like it's listening. The Fitbit is in the junk drawer under a nest of rubber bands and Allen wrenches. Every time I open it for a chip clip my knuckles brush the band like a small electric fence. She asked me for her phone before we even put her bag down. Not to scroll. To prune. She stood in the kitchen with her back to the fridge and unfollowed all of them, one by one, every glossy woman promising to turn suffering into content. When she got to a running account that used to make her heart light up like a pinball machine, she hesitated, then pressed and held and watched the little menu float up like a regret. "Remove," she said out loud, like you do when you're cutting open a package with a knife and want your hands to believe you. We had to do the coached family meal to make the pass real. The therapist's voice came through my phone speaker with that tiny delay that makes you feel like you're calling the moon. "Pick something you can't game," she said, which made us both bark out a laugh, because we speak this language now. We picked pizza, which is almost a cliché in that universe and also, specifically, a thing that has stood in our living room more times than I can count without causing a battle. I ordered from the place on the corner that cuts the slices like they want you to feel like a kid again. The box steamed when I opened it. Our daughter banged a silicone spoon on her tray like she was keeping time. I played it like I've been taught, no commentary, a normal wedge on a real plate, a folded napkin because we are not camping in our own kitchen. She sat, her thigh jiggling like a machine you left running in the garage. The therapist's voice, name the thought. Her eyes flicked up and she whispered, my brain is saying this is too much. My brain is not my boss. And then she lifted the slice with both hands like it was something heavy and took a bite. The sound our baby made in that exact second, pure affront that she was not also being offered Italian cheese, broke the tension in half. We laughed. She chewed. We made it to the crust. I wanted to throw confetti. I put the box back in the fridge without rearranging it into a math equation and she didn't open the door to fix it. The social worker knocked while the baby was napping later and did that thing where a person looks around a home and sees it both for its mess and its intent. My wife answered the door herself, hair in a lopsided knot, sleeves pushed up because the refeeding water likes her wrists right now and we're trying to make friends with it. Do you understand the plan? The woman asked, eyes soft but not blurred. I hate it, my wife said, clean as a bell, and I agree to it. The woman nodded like that sentence was a train pulling into a station on time and wrote a note I'll never see in a file I will never hold. She looked at the lemon tree. We like to write when things change, my wife volunteered, nodding toward the pot. The social worker smiled. So do we, she said, and left us a copy of an addendum as boring as it needs to be, no sole caregiving until clearance, no exceptions, a phone number in case the hallway feels long. Her father flew home the next morning. He stood in our foyer like a man drying off after a storm, lighter but a little disoriented by sun. He left his notebook on the counter, the one with ounces and nap lengths, like a relay baton. He kissed his granddaughter's foot and my wife's hair and told them both he'd be back for sauce and a soccer game in a not impossible future. She watched him go with her jaw set, not hard, just determined, then turned and reached for the baby monitor and said, show me how to read the stupid thing without making it a test. We sat on the rug and learned what the little icons mean, waves for ocean, bars for battery, and laughed at ourselves for surviving on cinematic fear, when sometimes the answer is press this button. There are landmines you only find by stepping. We had the baby's pediatrician appointment on Thursday, the kind where someone with very competent hands weighs your child and tells you if you're doing okay. The scale in that room is a friendly, well-shaped plastic thing that has swallowed up plenty of anxious parents and spit them back out with stickers. Still, a scale. My wife had a plan. She handed the nurse the little note her therapist told her to write, please cover numbers from parent with active ed. The nurse, middle-aged, practical, a woman who looks like she has made 97,000 good sandwiches in her life, said, got it, and put a sticky note right over the digital display, like it was the sun. Our daughter lay down, naked fury turned into coos by a string of rubber fish stuck to the ceiling. She looks well loved, the doctor said, without even looking up from a chart, and for a second I hated and loved the phrase in equal measure. Tracking beautifully, he added, which is a phrase I will tattoo onto the inside of my skull. My wife didn't peek. When the doctor left the room she let out a breath in a way that made her shoulders drop an inch and said, okay. On the way to the car we passed a poster about getting back to your pre-baby body with a photo of a woman holding dumbbells and my wife stopped, read it, and rolled her eyes so hard she saw last week. I don't want my pre-baby body, she said to no one. I want this one. It's been places. The baby squealed like an amen. We covered the mirror in our bedroom. It wasn't ceremonial. It was a fitted sheet from the clean laundry basket, navy with little white arrows, pulled taut over the frame and clipped with binder clips I stole from my desk. It looked ridiculous and, instantly, like relief. I'll tell you when I want it back, she said, palm flat on the sheet like she was smoothing a bed, and the way she didn't apologize for needing it felt like new bone knitting. The meds are starting to land like a soft animal that doesn't trust you yet but has decided you might be worth sleeping near. She told me she feels hungry sometimes now and it's not like an alarm, it's like a knock. It's civil, she said, incredulous. It asks. She looked almost offended, then laughed into her own hand and admitted it was nice. She texted me from the program a picture of a sandwich with a bite taken out of the middle like a cartoon and wrote, I didn't take off the edges, and I wrote back, I am not making a big deal of this. At night she falls asleep and does not wake up to count how many steps to the gate. Sometimes she wakes up because the baby is teething and wants to chew sadness into a giraffe, and she pads down the hall and sits in the ocean noise glow and hums a lullaby with no words. When she comes back her side of the bed smells faintly like Johnson & Johnson and chicken broth and I curl my hands around her elbow like I'm keeping the bed from floating away. We did a closet triage, not wildly. She pulled out the hunger-sized clothes with 2 fingers, like you do with something delicate and not yours anymore, and put them in a bag. She didn't try any of it on. We do not need to watch numbers shape themselves into denim myths. We drove them to a textile recycling bin behind the grocery store and slid the bag in. It made a hollow slide into a metal belly. I love those like a problem, she said, not sad, just accurate, and we stood there for a minute with our hands in our pockets like teenagers. There was a morning she almost folded. I watched it come for her across her face, a storm front over water. She was holding the baby and the baby arched in that way babies do when they are both furious and boneless, and her arms trembled and her mouth went hard and she said, quiet, I can't do this, I can't be the person with rules taped to her life. I went very still. I took the baby. You don't have to be anyone today but the person who eats breakfast and gets back in the car at 1, I said, flat and loving and as boring as a seatbelt. She stared at me like maybe there was a trick, then looked down at her own feet, which were swallowing the ugliest, softest sweatpants I could find in an online store meant for unflattering intimacy, and said, okay. She ate the thing on her plate. She got in the car at 1. We had an overnight. Not a graduation, a practice lap. The nurse looked at her vitals and shrugged the yukon of it into our hands. We brushed our teeth in the same tiny bathroom and she made a face at the pill bottle like it was a cousin she is learning to like and took the thing that steadies her. We laid next to each other without trying to be anything other than two tired mammals who picked each other, and I put my palm on her stomach and felt the warm, furious engine of it doing its job. Come back to me, she said, eyes half closed, and I said, I never left, and we both knew we were talking to different parts of the same person. In the morning the baby rolled from back to belly in a way that looked like a magic trick she didn't mean to do, and then she did it again, and my wife clapped like she'd just seen a rabbit pulled out of a hat. Our daughter pushed her face into my wife's chest and came up with milk breath, which doesn't make biological sense in our house and still felt accurate. She said and then ma, not the nonsense version, the real one, pointed like an arrow. My wife didn't do that fake skeptical thing we have both done to keep ourselves from being ridiculous. She said, I'll take that, soft as a prayer, and the baby patted her jaw like a stamp. On the way back to the program we stopped at the pharmacy and picked up a refill. The pharmacist told my wife the generic name in a voice that made it sound like a lake and my wife repeated it back, like she was learning a spell. In the car she took a sticky note out of my glove compartment and wrote, "Today I ate lunch with you," and stuck it to the back of her insurance card. So it's on me, she said, grinning like she'd gotten away with something wonderful. Before she went in she turned to me and said, out of nowhere, like it was newly obvious to her, "You can want this for me. I'm allowed to want it for me, too." Then she kissed the baby on the ear, stuck her cold nose in our daughter's neck and said the sentence she's been practicing until it fits inside her mouth without scraping. I am working on being here for all the boring Tuesdays. And then she went back in the sliding doors, holding her own sweatpants by the waistband like a kid clutching a security blanket that happens to have a drawstring, and the baby said ba ma at the air like she was informing the building who we are.